Hello and welcome to our presentation video on communication during mass casualty incidents. My name is Will McKinley.
I'm Garrett Kajowski.
And I am Andrew Rice. So, what is a mass casualty incident, or commonly referred to as an MCI? MCI is an incident which produces multiple casualties, such that emergency services, medical personnel, and referral systems within the normal catchment area cannot provide adequate and timely response and care without unacceptable mortality. So the basic goals of an MCI are: when you come on scene, you have more casualties than the available resources. The amount of casualties outweigh the amount of available resources. But with EMS, police, fire, our main objective is to equalize the amount of casualties to the amount of resources that we can provide. And if you equal out those two, then you can provide the highest level of care and transport to the patients within the MCI. So communication and MCI. There's going to be some obstacles that EMS, police, fire are all going to face. And these could be the terrain, if you have a lot of hills, if it's muddy, wet, rainy, the different frequencies, if police, fire, EMS, airport, they all have different frequencies. This could provide a challenge for them to overcome. The overloaded channels, if there is a lot of people operating within an MCI scene, channels can get overloaded, and there's going to need to be some challenges and obstacles to overcome this. The hospital, they can have like medical control, patient routing. There needs to be a transportation officer and a staging officer. All of these aspects of an MCI need to be addressed and have cognitive ability to overcome and give highest level of care to.
So where does communication fall in an MCI? Large-scale MCIs do have an increased potential for communication error due to multiple agencies possibly being involved, police, fire, different departments, maybe potential for multiple hospitals. Therefore, it's imperative that EMS, police, and hospital care systems have a planned system to communicate between the scene and the post-field care. Some examples of this include pre-agreed upon radio channels, callback response plans, potential specialty teams, and a proper ICS unified command. Fire agencies, police, and hospitals all have to be working in unison in order to maximize the potential to save as many lives as possible. With an MCI, there's a high potential for a large volume of patients to triage and transport, and communication is an essential component in the triage and transport process, so everyone knows who are the greens, yellows, reds, what are the priorities of the patients being transported, who's taking.
So as we all know, there's going to be some dynamics of an MCI. They're not going to be the same exact scenario every single time. And these are kind of the questions that we need to ask ourselves as EMS providers about the scene and its characteristics. So the first question is, what are my resources? What are my available resources that I can dispatch, that I can have at my disposal to outweigh the amount of casualties that I'm encountering? Who is a patient? So this could be your form of triage. Who is a critical patient? Who is just a walking wounded person? And you kind of need to sort these different aspects out. Which patient do I treat first? This is kind of your next level of triage. Which patients are most critical that I need to transport now? Which patients can wait until more available resources can come? Who can be salvaged? So that's basically saying, who can we save at this point? Who's going to be the ones that are going to have the black tags on them? So who can we save first? Who gets transported first? Those are going to be your critical patients, patients that are going to be in that red kind of criteria, who needs a trauma/specialty center. So this happens when there's a lot of burn victims. There's not a lot of hospitals that specialty treat burns. You have to transport them to a long distance place, and so you kind of have to be mindful about if you have burn victims about where you're going to transport them and who can help care for others. So who on scene can help care for these people? Is it going to be the police?
So the modern idea of what an MCI today has largely become focused on active shooter situations resulting in mass shooting casualty events. One of the most recent large-scale ones that we've seen today was the Mandalay Bay Hotel shooting in Las Vegas 2017, which resulted in 59 deaths. These types of incidents are becoming more and more frequent, and it's going to be really important for EMS response agencies to really start getting good plans in place for how to respond to these types of events. However, MCIs are not just focused on mass shooting situations. They can be a lot of different things, resulting in large scale casualties. Another thing, it could be a natural disaster like the Haiti earthquake, which resulted in well over 100,000 deaths. The terror attacks of 9/11 in 2001, which resulted in 2,996 deaths. Bombings can be considered an MCI. The Boston Marathon, for example, the most recent large-scale wildland fire in California, the Camp Fire, which resulted in almost 90 deaths. Weather-related, Hurricane Katrina in 2005, disease outbreaks like Ebola in Africa. All of these are considered MCIs. The disease is kind of a unique one because they're more drawn out as opposed to one large-scale instantaneous event that results in a lot of fatalities. In the case of the Ebola outbreak in 2014 to 2016, Africa was not able, or specifically New Guinea and some of the West African coast countries, were not able to handle the amount of people they were bringing in that were infected with this disease. It was a very large-scale outbreak, and the infrastructure response plans they had in place were not really adequate enough to handle that level of an outbreak. And finally, motor vehicle collisions are probably the most frequent MCI that EMS and fire police respond to. While they're not necessarily always large-scale and high in casualty count, they can still be considered MCIs, and those are very frequent. We see those a lot in a day-to-day. So a brief history of MCIs. MCIs can be traced back throughout history. Any large-scale loss of life, history is riddled with those. So it's difficult to declare when MCIs began, but the concept that we associate with MCIs is called triaging, when you have so many victims that you need to classify who gets care first. And this concept was created around 1792 by Napoleon's surgeon-in-chief, Baron Dominique Jean Larrey. He is credited with organizing the first system for handling large-scale casualty incidents in the Napoleonic era wars. He also created the first concept form of ambulance transport. The more modern technique that we commonly use today is the START triage system, which is simple triage and rapid treatment. Most modern MCI or fire and EMS agencies, even police, use this method today because it's quick, it's efficient, and it's pretty easy to implement into a scene. This method was developed by Hoag Hospital in Newport Beach fire in the 1980s in response to some large-scale events that they were facing in their area. So one of the trends that we're seeing is there's been a rise in the frequency of MCIs, and there are a lot of factors that play into this. Some of them are more social than others, but part of this is due to a rise in population. We're seeing very large metropolitan areas that are densely packed with people are frequently being targeted for attacks, or they're just more prone to large-scale incidents that occur. There's just a lot of people available, a lot of potential for death in these situations. Another thing is we have a pretty clear outline of what is considered an MCI, and so it's very easy for us to classify an incident as being an actual MCI as opposed to just another large-scale casualty scenario. And another trend that actually had a lot to do with the kind of adoption of an official EMS ambulance system in the United States was an increased casualty that we saw that in response to an increase in production of motor vehicles and weapons. So as we have more people on the road buying weapons, there's a lot more potential for people to misuse those tools, and which can result in large-scale mass casualty incidents. Some of the problems that we've seen with communication during these events are limitations that are created by radio traffic. So MCIs obviously require a lot of coordination, and that means a lot of radio traffic, people talking to each other, different divisions, different people. There's a lot of moving parts, and so having enough radio channels for frequencies available to handle all that can be difficult for some agencies. And then to add on to that, if those frequencies are encrypted or they're different between agencies, if you have police working on different channels or mutual aid response, fire districts or EMS agencies coming in and they're not all on the same channel, it becomes very difficult to coordinate with each other on who needs to do what. And then finally, if you have the encrypted frequencies, which are commonly found in airport settings because they're regulated by the FAA and the FCC, you can also see these in government areas. Having access to those channels can be difficult to secure for municipal fire departments or municipal private ambulance because they're not part of that organization, and that creates yet another barrier for communication in these situations. Another thing is a difference in protocol, which became very apparent in the Aurora, Colorado theater shooting, in which EMS was waiting for the police to clear the scene so that they could come in and start triaging patients, but the police didn't want to actually declare the scene safe, and so there was a significant delay in the EMS response to that scene, which resulted in a pretty clear breakdown in communication during an MCI. Whether or not it really hindered the ability to provide adequate care, it probably did, but that's kind of another issue. And then finally, the scale of the incident can have a big effect on the ability for people to communicate. Obviously, in small-scale incidents like large-scale motor vehicle collisions where there's a lot of people involved, but not necessarily as much as like a mass shooting, there's a different kind of type of structure that it's associated with that incident, and that can have a big effect on how we communicate. The future of MCI communication is not too much different from what people are already typically doing now. However, there are a few things that are becoming more frequent as we see this sort of system develop across the country. So we're seeing agencies becoming better at working together to develop a regional response plan. So that's communication or collaboration between police, fire, surrounding fire agencies, including EMS and all that, so that they have a plan set in place that they can adapt to whatever scenario they're working with. Alongside with that, ensuring that radio communication can be accessed seamlessly between these different agencies is really important, because if we can't communicate with each other over radio, we're going to have to start calling people, and then that just becomes really, really complicated, and there's a lot of things that can slip through the cracks that way. So ensuring that everybody has some way to access a common radio communication is becoming more and more important. And finally, not every agency can do this because of personnel numbers, but a lot of agencies will have a callback or activation of extra personnel so that they can staff city stations or hospitals in the event of these MCIs so that there is enough to take care of the rest of it. So some of the critical communication factors for an MCI are to establish ICS roles clearly and early. Assigning the different divisions of the ICS structure as early as possible is going to be a really critical factor so that we don't have to waste time figuring all that out on scene while we're trying to provide care. Having a common or easily adaptable communication system, this goes back to what we talked about, having similar or easily accessible radio frequencies without barriers like encryption or lots of radio traffic. If that means having extra radio caches so that those can be distributed to incoming agencies that are not necessarily part of the area, then that needs to be considered as well. And finally, establishing a mutual agency response plan. This includes police, fire and EMS agencies, and especially with the trauma centers or other kind of healthcare providers in the area. This is going to be a really critical factor in being prepared for these types of events.
We had the opportunity to interview Lieutenant Dan Quick, who is a paramedic firefighter for Corvallis Fire Department. Lieutenant Quick is the head of the special rescue team here in Corvallis, as well as having a background as a retired Navy SEAL and a rope rescue specialist. Some of the topics of this interview included, to him, what would be the most beneficial piece of advice to improve efficiency of communication during an MCI? What can do the opposite and tear down and degrade the efficiency of caring for patients during an MCI? And what is a way that someone can prevent chaos and a lack of order during an MCI? Some of the takeaways from this interview include it's imperative that the arriving unit announces that it is a mass casualty incident so that the rest of the department and surrounding agencies can prepare and delegate and request additional resources as needed. If they need extra ambulances, they need to find out where they're going to be taking the patients, if hospitals are filling up or full, what rooms. It's essential to have an established means of communication with these outlying resources. Essentially, EMS, police, and hospitals have to function as one fluid, dynamic team, all communicating and letting each other know what is happening either on the scene or at these hospitals, and updating one another with what's going on. Lieutenant Quick also spoke on an issue with paramedics or just first responders in general, is that they get this tunnel vision focus on one or two of these critical patients and they're not reaching a broad span of as many people that they can help as possible. And he reiterated the importance of announcing that it is an MCI as early as possible, requesting any additional resources that the arriving unit may need and what they potentially deem may be necessary, and then setting up and maintaining a proper ICS structure so everyone has an idea or knows who to go to in the chain of command, who is above them, who is below them.
So basically, in conclusion, talk about the main goal of every MCI, to balance out the casualties and the resources available. We talked about how the MCIs are dynamic. They're not always going to be the same type, so we always need to run through the same kind of questions that we're going to ask and to see where the available resources at, triage, and transport. We need early, effective, and efficient communication is always key in these large-scale events. Modern MCI protocols are still in their infancy, and there will always be ways to improve, especially with new technology and everything. We're always going to be updating protocols and always going to be finding out new ways to go about an MCI event. and establish a clear and mutual response plan with surrounding agencies and trauma centers based on fluid communication. So we talked about that communication is kind of the roots of effective MCI event with fire, police, and EMS and the hospitals. And so this proved to be very crucial in the effectiveness of these agencies within it. Thank you for watching our presentation. Name's Andrew.
My name is Will McKinley.
My name is Garrett Kajowski.
And that is the end of our presentation. Thank you.